turn this off now. Because the moment you understand what's coming, it will already know you watched, and it never forgets the ones who do.
They say your body senses danger before your mind understands it. That night, my skin burned where his hand touched me, even before I realized something was wrong. 3 days later, I found his face in a police report. He had been dead for 3 years, and somehow he was still walking. This happened in late November of 2023, just before Thanksgiving. I was 22 years old, living alone in a cramped studio apartment near Lakewood Crossing outside Milwaukee. The kind of neighborhood where trains rattle your walls and sirens become background noise. I was a full-time college student working evening shifts at a bakery inside Harbor Point Mall. I had been sick for almost a week. Not COVID, not flu, just some brutal respiratory infection that left my lungs burning and my voice shredded. Every breath felt like inhaling glass. But I didn't have the luxury of resting. My coworker, Marissa, had asked me to check on her elderly cat while she was visiting family. The cat needed daily medication. I promised I would. At the same time, I wanted to grab some old sports equipment from my stepfather's house, a bowling ball and tennis rackets I rarely got access to since I didn't own a car. Public transit was my only option. Looking back, every decision that day feels like a breadcrumb leading towards something waiting for me. By the time I transferred to the light rail, it was already past 9 p.m. Cold wind sliced through my jacket. The platform lights flickered like dying candles. The air smelled like frozen metal and ozone. No one else was waiting. The transit app kept lying to me. Bus arriving in 1 minute. Then suddenly, delayed 12 minutes. Then, service disruption. I was exhausted, coughing non-stop, weighed down by heavy bags. That's when a black sedan rolled slowly into the lot. Dark windows, engine idling too quietly. I saw 4 silhouettes inside. They were laughing, muffled, distorted like their voices were underwater. One door opened. A man stepped out. The car pulled away immediately. Not slowly, not casually, like it was fleeing. He didn't head toward the exit. He walked directly toward me. He sat beside me even though the entire platform was empty. Too close. Close enough that our coats brushed. I smelled something strange on him. Not sweat, not cologne. Something cold and metallic, like rust mixed with rainwater. I kept staring at my phone, pretending to scroll. Then I felt pressure on my shoulder. His arm slid around me, not gently, possessively. My body froze, my thoughts disappeared. My heartbeat slammed so hard it felt like it might burst my ribs. "You're shaking," he whispered. His voice sounded hollow, not echoed, empty, like sound falling into a cave. I whispered that I was fine. He held me there for several seconds too long, then released me. I tried convincing myself it was misunderstanding. Maybe he thought I was sick, maybe cultural difference, maybe accidental. But my skin burned where he touched me. A minute passed. Then his arm wrapped around me again. This time, his fingers moved slowly across my back, deliberate, almost curious, like he was mapping my bones under my coat. That's when I noticed his hands. They weren't just pale, they were bluish. Veins dark like frozen ink. And the cold went straight through my jacket into my muscle. My stomach dropped. The bus headlights finally appeared. I slipped out of his grip and said quietly, "My bus is here." He stood immediately. "I'm coming too." Not a question. On the bus, I stayed standing near the front. He sat directly behind me. Every reflection in the window distorted his face slightly, like the glass couldn't properly hold his image. Sometimes he didn't appear at all in the reflection. I texted a friend without looking down. "Something wrong, man following me." I made a decision. I wouldn't go home. I wouldn't go to Marissa's apartment. Instead, I would go to my workplace. Security cameras, co-workers, locked doors. When I stepped off the bus, his hand clamped onto my shoulder again, hard. Pain shot through my collarbone. His grip felt numb, like frost spreading into my skin. "You walk too fast," he said calmly. Not angry, not threatening, observational, like a doctor examining something. We walked toward the back service entrance of the mall. My vision tunneled, my ears rang, my legs felt weak. I saw 2 coworkers standing by the door. I tore free and sprinted. They slammed the door shut behind me. Immediately, bang, bang, bang. The handle rattled violently. His shadow passed across the frosted glass. When his face pressed briefly against the window, my blood went cold. His eyes were cloudy, milky, like cataracts, like drowned glass. The security searched the area. They found nothing. No footprints, no camera footage showing anyone approaching the door. That night, the spot on my shoulder stayed cold for hours. No matter how many blankets I wrapped myself in, no matter how hot the shower was, the cold lived inside my skin. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt fingers counting my ribs in the dark. 3 days later, curiosity destroyed me. I searched local news archives, transit incidents, assaults, hit and runs. I found a short article dated October 2020. Unidentified male fatally struck near Lakewood Crossing platform. The description matched him perfectly. Height, build, clothing, time of night, black sedan fleeing the scene. The surveillance still image barely showed a shape, mostly distortion and static. The caption said, "Subject appears partially unrecordable due to camera malfunction." My hands shook. I zoomed in. The posture, the slight forward tilt of the head, it was him, dead for 3 years. After that, the dream started. I dreamed of standing on the empty platform alone, snow falling upward, lights flickering, hearing footsteps behind me but never seeing anyone. Sometimes I felt his arm wrap around me in the dream and woke up with frost on my window glass even though the heat was running. Once I woke up with fingerprints faintly visible on my shoulder, pale marks that faded after minutes. 2 weeks later, it happened again. I was brushing my teeth when the bathroom temperature dropped instantly. My mirror fogged. A pressure settled onto my shoulder. Cold, familiar. A whisper brushed my ear. "You still shake." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I moved apartments 3 months later. Different neighborhood, different transit line, different building. The dreams followed me. The cold followed me. Sometimes my phone camera glitches when I'm alone. Sometimes reflections lag half a second behind my movements. Sometimes I feel someone standing just outside my bedroom door, not breathing, not moving, just waiting. I went back to the police article recently. There was an update I hadn't noticed before. A witness claimed the man had been seen wandering the platform for weeks after his death, appearing briefly on malfunctioning cameras, standing too close to lone passengers, vanishing before authorities arrived. They called it a data glitch. I know better. He doesn't know he's dead. Or worse, he knows, and he doesn't want to be alone anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel fingers counting my ribs in the dark, like he's making sure I'm still here, like he's waiting for the night I finally stop running.
I need to tell you about what happened to me last winter, and I need you to understand something before I start. When someone you've known your entire life invites you to stay with them and you accept, you're making an assumption. You're assuming that the person on the other end of that invitation is still the same person you remember. But what if they're not? What if something else is wearing their face, using their voice, living in their skin? I'm about to tell you about 3 nights I spent in the Colorado Rockies. 3 nights that ended with me driving through a blizzard at 4 in the morning, shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel.
3 nights that made me block my oldest friend's number and refuse to ever speak his name again. Because on the 3rd night, I saw something that wasn't human, and it was pretending to be him. My name is Marcus, and this happened in late January of 2023. I was living in Chicago at the time, working a dead-end marketing job and barely keeping my head above water. The winters there are brutal, but you get used to it. What you don't get used to is the loneliness. I hadn't spoken to my childhood best friend Thomas in almost 7 years. We grew up together in the suburbs outside Milwaukee. Same elementary school, same soccer team, same group of friends who slowly scattered after high school like leaves in the wind. Thomas and I stayed close through college, but after graduation, he made a decision that surprised everyone. He moved to Colorado. Not Denver or Boulder or anywhere normal. He moved to a tiny mountain town called Ridgemont, population 412. His parents had inherited a cabin from his uncle, and Thomas decided he wanted to live there full time. He said he was tired of the noise, tired of people. He wanted peace. At first, we kept in touch. Weekly phone calls, the occasional video chat. But those calls got shorter, more awkward. The silences lasted longer. Eventually, we just stopped trying. No fight, no falling out, just distance. So when I got a text from him out of absolutely nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon in January, it caught me completely off guard. The message was simple. "Hey man, long time. You should come visit. I've got the cabin to myself, and it's beautiful up here this time of year. We should catch up." I stared at that text for a solid 10 minutes. Part of me wanted to ignore it. 7 years of silence, and now he wants to reconnect? But another part of me, the part that still remembered late-night video game marathons and inside jokes that nobody else understood, that part felt a weird pull of nostalgia. I responded, "When?" He replied almost instantly, "This weekend. Drive up Friday, leave Sunday. I'll make it worth your trip." Something about the phrasing felt odd. "I'll make it worth your trip," not "it'll be great to see you," or "we'll have fun." But I brushed it off. Maybe he'd just gotten weird from living alone in the mountains. That happens to people. I told my boss I needed a personal day on Friday, packed a weekend bag, and on Friday morning at 6 a.m., I started the 9-hour drive to Ridgemont, Colorado. I had no idea I was driving toward the worst weekend of my life. The drive itself was fine for the first 6 hours. Highway stretches, gas station coffee, podcasts to keep me company. But once I hit the mountain roads, everything changed. The GPS took me off the main highway and onto increasingly narrow roads that wound up into the Rockies. The pavement turned to gravel, the gravel turned to packed snow. I passed maybe 3 cars in 2 hours. The trees on either side grew thicker and darker until it felt like I was driving through a tunnel. It was only 3:30 in the afternoon, but the sky was already starting to dip behind the mountain peaks. The sky turned that weird gray-purple color that happens right before true darkness sets in. My phone lost signal about 40 minutes before I reached the cabin. When the GPS finally said, "You have arrived," I almost didn't believe it. The cabin sat at the end of a long, winding driveway that I had to take extremely slowly because of the ice. It was bigger than I expected. 2 stories, dark wood siding, a stone chimney, and large windows that reflected the dying light. But something about it felt wrong immediately. Maybe it was how isolated it was. The nearest house I'd seen was at least 3 miles back down the mountain. Or maybe it was how the trees seemed to lean towards it, like they were trying to get closer. I parked and sat in my car for a moment, engine still running, heater blasting. I could see a light on inside. A shadow moved past one of the windows. Then the front door opened and Thomas stepped out onto the porch. He looked different. I know that sounds stupid. Of course he looked different. 7 years had passed. People change. But this wasn't just about appearance. He'd lost weight, a lot of weight. His face looked gaunt, almost hollow. His eyes had dark circles under them like he hadn't slept in weeks. But it was more than that. The way he moved was wrong. He walked down the porch steps in this stiff, mechanical way, like someone had described how walking works, and he was doing his best to imitate it. When he smiled and waved, the smile didn't reach his eyes. It just sat on his face like a mask. I got out of the car anyway, because what else was I gonna do? Drive 9 hours back to Chicago because my friend looked tired? "Marcus," he called out. His voice sounded flat, rehearsed. "You made it." "Yeah, man," I said, grabbing my bag from the back seat. "Traffic wasn't bad, roads got a little sketchy toward the end, but I'm here." He nodded slowly, too slowly, like he was processing each word individually before responding. "Good. That's good." We stood there in awkward silence for a second or two. Then he blinked rapidly, like he'd forgotten what came next in the conversation, and said, "Come inside. It's cold." The inside of the cabin was warm, almost too warm, but it felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture. There was a couch, a coffee table, a small kitchen area with a table and 2 chairs, a wood-burning stove in the corner that was crackling with a fire, but no pictures on the walls, no books on the shelves, no personal items anywhere. It looked like a stage set, like someone had dressed a cabin to look lived in but forgot to add the details that make a space feel like home. "You can sleep on the couch," Thomas said, pointing. "It pulls out into a bed. There's blankets in the closet." "Sounds good," I said, setting my bag down. Across from the couch was a hallway. It stretched back into the cabin, long and narrow, with 3 doors, 2 on the left, 1 at the very end on the right. All 3 of them were open, and because there were no lights back there, all I could see was darkness. Complete, impenetrable darkness. I don't know why I felt this way, but looking down that hallway made my stomach turn. Thomas noticed me staring. "Bathrooms down there," he said quietly. "Last door on the right. The other 2 are guest rooms. They're empty." "Got it," I said, tearing my eyes away from the hallway. We spent the rest of the evening trying to catch up, but it was painful. Every conversation felt forced. He'd ask me a question about my life, I'd answer, and then there'd be this long, uncomfortable pause where he'd just stare at me. Not in a curious way, in an evaluating way, like he was studying me. And he kept glancing towards the hallway, quick little looks like he was checking to make sure something was still there. Around 10 p.m., he said he was tired and went upstairs to his bedroom. I heard the door close, the lock click. I sat on the couch alone, surrounded by the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside, and I thought to myself, this was a mistake. But I was here now. One more day. I could handle one more day. I pulled out the couch, set up the bed, and tried to sleep. That's when the footsteps started. I don't know what time I fell asleep, but I know exactly what time I woke up. 2:47. I know because I grabbed my phone the second my eyes snapped open, heart already racing, because I'd heard something that didn't belong. Footsteps. Not the slow, creaking footsteps of someone walking carefully through an old house. These were fast, frantic, like someone sprinting back and forth across the floor above me. I lay there frozen, listening as the footsteps pounded from one end of the upstairs floor to the other. They'd stop for a second, then start again. Stop, start, over and over for at least 30 seconds. Then, complete silence. I waited for a door to open, for Thomas to call down and explain what the hell that was. For anything. Nothing. I told myself it was him. Maybe he had a nightmare. Maybe he sleepwalks. Maybe he was exercising. At 3 in the morning? In the dark? Even as I tried to rationalize it, I didn't believe myself. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me back to sleep, but my dreams were wrong, disjointed. I kept seeing that hallway, and in my dreams, something was standing at the end of it, watching me. The next morning, Thomas acted like nothing happened. He was already awake when I got up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He didn't greet me, didn't ask how I slept, just stared out the window at the snow-covered trees. "Morning," I said, trying to sound normal. He turned to look at me slowly. Morning. Were you up last night? I heard footsteps. His expression didn't change.